Welcome to the Growing in Love for Life podcast, where it's all about saving and strengthening your marriage and creating the relationship you really deserve and want to have. And now, from growinginloveforlife.com, relationship and marriage coach and best-selling author, your host, Liam Naden.
This is episode number 40 of the Growing in Love for Life podcast. Hi everyone, Liam Naden here again, and today we're going to talk about creating great communication for a great marriage. In an earlier podcast, actually episode number 20, I talked about communication and the key to really being effective in your communication with your husband or your wife. And you know, communication is such an important area, I'm sure you'd agree, that I thought it'd be worthwhile to give you a few more distinctions and ideas on communication in another episode. So that's what we're going to look at today. Now, the thing about communication is that it's probably one of the most misunderstood and poorly communicated concepts of human relationships. In fact, we all know that great communication is essential to a good marriage. And we certainly all know when we don't have it, but what really is communication? And not only that, but how do you make your communication more effective? You know, one of the most powerful features of a great marriage is great communication. The husband and the wife, they can get through to each other in an easy, clear, and intensely loving way. And they instantly and usually instinctively know how to speak each other's language. And their relationship benefits greatly as a result of that. So let's start by asking, really, what is communication? Well, quite simply, communication is the process whereby your intention or intentions are understood by another person. So one person clearly understands, on both an emotional as well as a logical level, the message or the meaning another person is trying to convey. And of course, we're looking here within the context of a marriage, so those two people are going to be the husband and the wife. You know, there have been many books written on communication, but in fact, the whole process is really quite simple. And really, to create great communication in a marriage, or in fact, any interaction between two people for that matter, you simply need two things to be present. Firstly, you need a willingness by both people to actually want to communicate and to hear what the other person has to say. And secondly, you need to have the ability to communicate in the communication language of the other person. Now we're going to talk about these 2 points. The first one's pretty obvious. I mean, obviously, people in difficult marriages, often they simply just don't want to communicate with their spouse. And frankly, you can have the best communication techniques and skills in the world, but if the person you want to communicate with doesn't want to hear you or doesn't want to interact with you, it's not really going to be a lot of help. So looking at it from this perspective, you can see that great communication is actually the result of building a great relationship. And we've talked about in some previous podcasts ideas on how to build a great relationship. So great communication is the result of building a great relationship. It's not the other way around. So if you want to have great communication in your marriage, then create a marriage where your spouse wants to communicate with you. It's as simple as that. So that's the first component of great communication in a marriage. The second point, though, which is the ability to communicate in the communication language of the other person, by contrast, this is neither obvious nor well as understood or even known about by most people. But the truth is that actually each of us has an individual communication language. And that means that the way we literally take in information varies from person to person. And funnily enough, although most of us can obviously hear with our ears, this is not the only way or even the main way that we actually hear things. We have other ways of hearing. And after all, hearing is simply understanding information. And they can include what we see and even how and what we touch. So, in other words, we use all of our senses in our communication, but each of us use them with varying degrees of importance and emphasis, if you like. And the languages of two people can be very different. Now, just imagine a marriage where the husband spoke French and the wife spoke Norwegian, and neither spoke the other person's language. they're obviously not going to get very far in their communication, even if they both wanted to. So one or both of them is going to have to learn the other's language. And it's very, very similar with our communication language. Our own individual communication language can be just as foreign to our husband or our wife. And the thing is that people in great marriages have learnt, consciously or otherwise, and usually unconsciously, they've learnt how to get through to their spouse by understanding the main ways their spouse takes some information, the language of their communication. Actually, learning to understand your husband or your wife's communication language, and of course your own as well, that's something I go into great detail about in my 30-day program, the Save Your Marriage Relationship Transformation Program. And it's something you might want to consider, because once you really understand your partner's communication language, most of your misunderstandings are simply just going to fall away. And with that, a lot of your problems and insecurities are going to disappear as well, because you're both going to be able to make each other feel more loved as you communicate your love and your feelings on much more profound levels. In fact, and I've seen this happen many times, knowing your spouse's communication language has the power to transform your marriage literally almost overnight. Okay, well, we all know how important communication is in a marriage. I'm obviously not telling you anything new about that. But in closing, I just want you to imagine what your marriage could be like if there was a strong and unconditional desire from both you and your spouse to share your thoughts and feelings. And also, if you both really understood each other's communication language. Imagine your marriage with fewer arguments and misunderstandings, without feeling resentful because your spouse didn't get it, or in which you don't have to compromise your thoughts and feelings. You know, it's really possible, and it's an integral part of the only sort of marriage worth having, and that's a great one. Well, I wish you all the best for a great marriage for you, and we'll talk again soon. Bye for now.